In this video, I'm going to teach you how you can come up with better moves in chess. So in a lot of positions, the first thing you need to do when looking at a position is to identify key features of the position. For example, if you look at this position right here, what is going on? What are the key features? Where are the kings at? Where are the pieces at? And the first thing that should come to your mind is the fact that the kings are castled on opposite sides. So the white king is castled on the king side, black king is castled on the queen side. So what do we know about these positions in opposite side castling? We need to start a pawn storm and we need to start attacking our opponent's king. So the first thing you need to do is you need to identify key features in the position. That could be a pawn structure in a lot of positions. That could be the placement of the kings, and you need to act according to those features. So in this case, that would be the opposite side castling, and you need to start a pawn storm. So in this position, white played this move b4, knight to d5, a4, and in this position, knight takes e3 was played. Both captures, queen e3 and f e3, are viable options. F takes e3 was chosen in the game, and after a move like king to b8, a5, white is basically just going after black's king. Knight to e7 was tried by black, and knight takes d6 chosen by the white pieces. So after knight takes d6 here, what's going on in this position? What are we trying to do? So with white, once again, you want to go b5 and b6. And right now, this is really the only plan that you got. You have some other moves as well. You don't necessarily have to play b5 right away. For example, you can start with h3 and deal with this pin first and foremost. e4 is actually what was played in the game. And a great thing about e4 is that it controls the f5 and d5 squares, so it basically controls the mobility of this knight on e7, and queen to f4 chosen by black, and then b5 chosen by white, h5 chosen by black, and b6. So both sides just simply trying to attack each other, and then h4 chosen by the black pieces. So in positions like these, what you need to do is that you sort of have to evaluate whether your opponent's moves are creating immediate threats or not. So h5, h4 is aiming to get the pawn to h3 and open up the position. So let's say you were to play a move like rook to b1. h3 would actually be a really dangerous move in this case, because now this rook is going to open up, and if you play a move like b3, okay, now you just lose. Queen takes f3 just simply wins this knight on f3. So this would be very, very bad for the black pieces. But going back, of course, you don't have to allow all of this. You don't have to go b takes a7 immediately either with an immediate counterattack. You can just stop the threat. You can just take a quick breath and realize that nothing immediate was going on in the position. You can play a move like h3, which stops the advancement by black, and this bishop has to move. In the game, actually, rook to h5 was chosen because black realized that he was losing. So instead, let's say you play a move like bishop to h5. The problem is, in this position, the attack continues. Queen to b2, and you're going to open up the position here. If black tries a defensive idea like c takes b6, a takes b6, and a6, something like this, the problem is this queen is also very poorly placed. So you can play moves like knight to e5. You have potential sacrificial ideas on a6. Say this queen moves somewhere to, let's say, to h6, or g3 is probably the most accurate square, I would say. You can go bishop takes a6 immediately, and then you can go queen to b4, going after this knight, also trying to play queen c5, queen c7, or queen a5, queen a6, and trying something on the a file. But the thing is, this is such a powerful position right here. There's not much that black can do. So that is why, instead of retreating the bishop in this position, black chose to actually sacrifice it. And the idea here was that after takes, there is some h3, some vague ideas. Black is basically hoping for a miracle. This is completely lost for the black pieces. However, for white, now that black sacrificed the bishop, a new path to victory has opened up. You don't necessarily need to go and attack this king anymore. You know that you're going to get counterattacked. So for example, if you play a move like b takes a7 and then try to play a move like a6, yes, you're still winning, but if you like delay this, if you try to mindlessly just bring the pieces over here and you don't really do anything, there's going to be h3. And the thing is, this is still a winning position. However, now you have to be very, very careful because black's counterplay is coming. So what you need to do is you need to realize that this right here, b takes a7 and attack on the king, is not necessarily your only option anymore because you won this bishop on g4. Instead, what you can do is play a move like knight to e5, for example. And once you play knight to e5, you're attacking the queen. You're also offering a queen trade. Say the queens are traded off, you go into a winning endgame here because you are up a whole bishop. This is completely winning for the white pieces. So what you need to remember is that you don't necessarily need to be focused on a singular plan. So for example, you don't need to be too focused on attacking this king. If something as major as this happens, you have to realize that new ideas open up in the position. So this is how you start to find better and better moves, and this is how you start to find ideas that are actually practical. Because in this position, yes, you can go for a counter attack, but there's also a huge possibility of black attacking you. So why not take the path of least resistance, and why not trade the queens off instead in a position like this? Because this is a very practical decision. It centralizes the knight, so knight e5 is a centralizing move. It attacks the pawn on f7. It offers a queen trade. This rook is hanging in a lot of lines, and this is just a very nice practical decision which does not give black any counterplay. This is just completely lost. And remember that you don't necessarily have to go for these crazy attacks if you can get the queens off the board and be up in material. So remember that you should always take the path of least resistance. Another key feature that you need to identify in positions is the pawn structure. And pawn structure is extremely, extremely important. Whether the position is open or whether it's closed makes a huge, huge difference. So in this position, the position is completely closed off. The center is closed here. Black is trying to strike with a move like c5. If the position was open, you need to focus on developing and getting your pieces out as quickly as possible. But this is a closed position. It's a bit more strategic and less tactical, at least right away. It's not tactical at this current moment, but you still need to be very, very careful. And you need to remember that you need to play in the direction where your pawn chain is headed towards. And the thing about pawns is that pawns give you clues into the position. If you look at the pawn structure, you can use the pawn structure in order to determine what the plans are in the position. For example, in this case, let's say a couple of moves get played, bishop e7, castles, castles. You need to realize that you have these two amazing pawns on d4 and e5. You have these knights guarding these pawns, which is very, very useful. And you need to realize that you have a lot of space on this side of the board. You have a lot of space over here. And the thing is, this f6 square was taken away from black when we played e5. So the knight had to be developed to e7 and f5 instead of going to the typical f6 square, which means that this knight right here is not going to be a great defender of the king. The knight on f6 would have been a wonderful defender of, for example, the h7 pawn, but the knight on f5 is just a little bit too loosey-goosey for my liking. So the thing about these positions is that you got to look at the pawn structure, and based on the pawn structure, you can then come up with ideas. So you look at this pawn structure, you see that it's headed this way to the direction of the black king. And what you do here is, first of all, you play bishop d3, putting the bishop on a slightly better square. Let's say rook to c8 is played. You can even play moves like g4. g4 looks absolutely ludicrous. We're pushing the pawn in front of our king. Doesn't that go against literally every principle in the book? Yes, but, and when I say but, I mean a huge, huge but. This right here, g4, is not a bad move whatsoever. The reason is that your opponent cannot attack you. And the reason why he cannot attack you is because he simply doesn't have the pieces over here that are required to actually perform a successful attack on the white king. So with a move like g4, say knight h4 is played, and after knight takes h4, bishop h4, let's say we play f4, and let's say the bishop goes back to e7. Not a great move, but you know, a move that kind of makes sense because you're trying not to get this bishop trapped with f5 or with g5 and queen g4. You're trying to sidestep this so you can play f6 and do some stuff there. A logical move, not the best one, but a logical looking move. In these types of positions, look at your pieces. Your bishop is aiming this way. Your bishop on c1 is also aiming this way. Once you play f5, this bishop will also be aiming towards the opponent's king. The queen is going to be attacking the king in a couple of moves, and so is the rook. So you have possibilities of attacking all over the place in a position like this, and this is very, very dangerous for black. And you have to realize that whenever you're in these types of situations where you got this sort of a pawn structure, when you got a closed pawn structure, you have to use the pawns as a reference point. And once you do that, then a whole lot of possibilities will open up. So this bishop goes back, you will continue developing with bishop to e3, and then after a certain point, let's say black plays f6, because black has to do something over here. Black just simply cannot allow you to set up a move like f5. So if you go king h1, let's say black does something completely random, like not even related to what's going on in the position. All of a sudden, there's a massive, massive attack on this pawn, and all of a sudden, there are potential sacrifices. If you go bishop to g5, thinking you stopped sacrifices here, no, there's still f6, and the attack continues. This is a very, very dangerous position that you cannot deal with the black pieces. This is just completely lost at this point. Bishop takes e3, queen takes e3, now queen to h6 is coming with queen g7 checkmate, and there's really not much you can do to stop it. You have to like give up the queen, but of course this is going to be completely lost. So the pawn structure is also a key feature of the position, and it gives you practical ideas on what your opponent can do and what he cannot do. So after g4, your opponent cannot attack your king. However, you can attack his king, and that is because of this structure right here. So now let's take a look at this position right here. And in this position, white is down a whole bishop. Well, actually, technically, white has one pawn for the bishop. However, white is still down in material. But despite that, in this position, there is an incredible resource that not only keeps an equality for white, but actually, according to the computer, white is slightly better in this position. So if you want to pause this video and find an incredible resource that white has here, you should do that because it's a very nice move and very nice sequence of moves, I should say. But I'm going to tell you what it is right now. So the first thing, right before I tell you what it is, the thing you have to remember is that whenever you're playing games like these, whenever you're playing chess in general, you want your pieces to be as active as possible, and you want your opponent's pieces to be as passive as possible. That should be your goal in almost every position in chess. There's not a single position where, the reverse, the opposite would apply. So you want to get your pieces as active as possible, and you want to get your opponent's pieces as passive as possible. And that should give you a hint as to what this answer is. And the correct move here is this very, very nice move, pawn to d5. Now, after pawn to d5, what does this move accomplish? So what this does is that it opens up the queen's attack towards this knight right here. However, isn't this knight protected? So why are we even doing this? But the thing is, what we're trying to do with a move like d5 is that we're trying to increase the pressure. Even though we're not necessarily threatening this knight right away, we're still trying to increase some pressure. We're still trying to tie down this bishop to the defense of this knight. So what will black do in this position? Let's say black takes on d5. This is the most natural looking move. And now here's the problem for white if you capture this pawn. If you capture this, what happens is that this rook opens up, the bishop opens up, the queen opens up. So basically, after a move like bishop takes d5, the rook is open, the bishop is active, the queen is also active. So all of black's pieces activate. So first things first, you want it to activate activate your queen, you want to activate your pieces to the maximum capacity, but you also want to minimize your opponent's activity. So that is why you play this move, c5. With c5, this bishop stays locked on this diagonal, at least temporarily. There are some possibilities in the future where black can push the pawn and open up the bishop, but at least for now, it is very passive. So is this rook now after c5, because it's looking at a defended pawn. The queen is under attack. It has to move. And the thing is, in these types of positions, you're down a lot of material, so you have to pounce. You have to just go after your opponent right away. So you have to play moves like knight to f4, hitting this rook right here and also hitting this bishop on e6. If the rook goes back, you have rook takes e6 with a wonderful tactic. fe6, knight e6 is a fork. And if rook takes g5 is played, which is the best move in the position, now we take this bishop with a check. F takes e6. Now we take this now we take this rook right here, and this knight is going to fall momentarily. And after e5, we can even go queen takes e5. We can go even this far, and after queen e5, rook e5, we're attacking both the bishop and the knight. So this is a very, very clever resource. If rook e8 is played, gf6, bishop f6, we take this, and we actually end up being up a whole exchange in this position. So we went from being down a whole piece to being up an exchange. So that is a very, very wonderful transformation of the position. So what you need to do in positions where you don't know what to do, you have to look at your pieces. You have to realize, okay, how can I make my pieces better? And that's how you come up with a move like d5, because d5 improves the queen, adds further pressure to the knight, and after black takes, which is actually the best move according to the computer, is this, but this is a weird move. I don't think a lot of humans, well, actually it makes some sense because you're actually just giving back the piece for a lot of pawns, but the thing is, this looks like the most natural move because a lot of people here would try to maintain this bishop. But the thing is, not only you want to increase the activity of your pieces, you also want to reduce the activity of your opponent's pieces, and that's what c5 accomplishes. So congratulations to anybody who found this idea, d5 and c5. Comment down below if you did, and actually comment down below what you thought of in this position, because this is a very interesting position. I'm very curious to see what you were thinking about, what ideas you had here, and what plans did you want to come up with. Now you might ask me a question like, okay, why not a move like c5, for example? But with c5, the problem is that you're giving up a lot of control over d5. So after queen c7, and let's say you play d5 right now, the problem is that you don't have this pawn on c4 anymore. It's on c5, right? Because the pawn is no longer here supporting d5, and because of that, the pawn doesn't have to take. If the pawn takes, we actually transpose back into the same position that we had earlier. But the bishop will simply take here, and now, and yes, you have activated your queen here, but now this bishop is also active, and this rook is, okay, not that active, but it's going to get active momentarily, and black is in the driver's seat in this position. So remember to always activate your pieces as much as possible. Don't create weak squares such as d5, and try to shut down your opponent's pieces as much as you can. Continuing the theme of activity, let's take a look at this position right here. And once again, if you want to pause the video right now, you can try to pause the video and figure out what is going on in the position and how you would continue here. Now, let me tell you what I played, because this is actually a position that I had in an actual game. And in this position, I played the top computer move, pawn to c5. And how did I come up with this idea, pawn to c5? Isn't this just a bad move? Doesn't it just simply hang a whole pawn on c5? Well, yes, but also not really. So let me actually explain how I came to the conclusion that c5 was a very good move. If you take a look at this position right here, you have to realize The rook is really bad on d8. It's looking at this pawn that's protected by the pawn on c3. So is the bishop. The rook on e8 is also it's actually even more passive than the rook on d8 because you're looking at your own pawn. And the queen, in addition to that, is completely passive as well. So you have a position that's very solid with the black pieces. There are not a lot of weaknesses. However, you're not really active, and you don't really want solidity in positions like these. You want activity. That's what matters most. Activity of your pieces. That's how you put pressure on your opponent, and that's how you actually get them to blunder, get them to make mistakes. So with a move like c5, let's say opponent plays a random move, just a very bad move, a3. After cd4, cd4, look at this transformation of the position. Now the rook that was passive on d8 is actually no longer passive. So we've activated this rook without moving it, because now we actually have a tangible target on d4. And so is the bishop. Bishop has been activated because of this move c5. So if we captured this pawn here, after we captured this pawn, now we have a clear target for this bishop, because earlier we had no targets. This bishop was bad, but this move c5 allowed this bishop to become very, very active. However, now there's a very interesting idea that you had to see in this position. And what happens if the opponent takes the pawn on c5? How does that help us? What's funny is that this move is actually objectively, according to the computer evaluation, this is worse than playing a3. a3 is legitimately better than taking this pawn on c5. So after pawn takes c5, we have an interesting idea that we can play. Now the move that we want to play in reality is this move e5. However, we cannot do that because of rook to d8, and then there's bishop takes e5, and we lose this pawn. If we try to pin the bishop, there's always going to be f4, just simply defending it. So this is not what we want to do. Instead, after pawn takes on c5, we want to throw in this check. After rook takes d1, rook d1, now we play e5. And now after e5, I want you to notice this rook has opened up, so has the queen, and we have gained more control over the central squares over here. So the bishop has to go back, and after the bishop goes back to h2, because where else does the bishop go? Because it cannot go to g3, you simply have a fork, so it has to go back to h2 on this square right here. It doesn't technically have to go back. There's also rook e1, but I would have played rook e7 in this position, and bishop h2 has to be played anyways. So my opponent, my opponent played bishop h2 right away, and here there is this move queen to h5. Now this is not actually exactly what happened in the game, but this is the idea that I had. Something else happened differently. The reason why I'm not showing the whole game was because it was actually a terrible game at the end. There were so many blunders because of time trouble, but this moment right here I thought was very, very interesting. But later on in the game I played this move queen h5, and with queen h5 I'm attacking this pawn, I'm pressuring this pawn and this rook. I'm also pressuring this bishop. Now after queen, let's say, defends this bishop on this square on h2, now we go e4. And now our queen is very active, our rook is very active, our bishop is good. It's not the best piece it can possibly be, but at least we have improved our queen and rook tremendously, and we have somewhat improved this bishop. How can I do the yellow circle? I want to do, there we go. So we have tremendously improved our queen and the rook. We have somewhat improved our bishop. But if you compare this position to this position right here, all the way back in the beginning, all of our pieces are passive. But if you compare this to this position, now we have two extremely good pieces. One maybe slightly not a great piece, but if you look at our opponent's pieces, this queen is very bad because it's actually a target, because we're utilizing this pin on the pawn. So this queen is a target. The rook is also somewhat of a target, and so is the bishop. So all of these pieces, yes, they have like open diagonals and open lines over here, but they're not really doing anything with this open space. Nothing is happening on this open space. But for white, we actually have tangible pressure and we have tangible ideas. So that's why this move c5 all the way back here was so powerful. At first glance, it looks like a pawn sacrifice, but all of a sudden we activate all of our pieces. And that's how I want you to think. I don't want you to be overly materialistic, because when you're overly materialistic in these positions, you're going to play bad moves. You're going to do something else. I don't even know. Like, I don't even see any other good moves in this position. I guess maybe king f8, which makes some sense. You're going to play moves like king f8, king e7, try to challenge the rook on the h file. So this actually would not be that bad of an idea. It's not the best move, this king f8, but it's not the worst move either. But the thing is, c5 definitively activates so many of your pieces and creates so much pressure on white's position. So always look for these pawn breaks. If your pieces are active and if you don't have good moves with your pieces, chances are you will have a good move with your pawns. And with this pawn, you not only activate this rook, you also activate the bishop. And if it's taken, well, now you activate basically everybody over here. The queen, the rook, this bishop also, and you get a very nice position just like this. So now let's take a look at this position, and I'm not going to talk about this position for too long because this video is already very long and there's like one whole game that I want to show you right after this. So in this position, white has this bishop and a queen battery aiming at this king on g7, well, aiming at this pawn on g7, threatening checkmate. We also have our own battery, but it's defended by the bishop on f1. So in this position, we have to defend against this threat. We have a couple of different options. We have knight f5. Unfortunately, this loses right away to rook e5, and it's just a tactical mistake because after rook takes e5, you cannot take the rook. Queen takes g7 is checkmate. So knight f5 is very bad. This is the first move, and it doesn't defend the pawn on g7 at all. But there's also queen g5. This is also a decent move, however, not necessarily the best choice. We can do a lot better than this because a move like queen g5 is only a defensive move. However, a move like f6 defends the threat and also restricts opponent's pieces at the same time. So for example, what do I mean by that? If this knight goes to f3, we can play this move e5, and now we have this incredible like wall of pawns. And this wall of pawns is very, very good because this bishop cannot threaten g7 anymore. So this bishop has been completely nullified by this structure right here. Because of the fact that we played f6 and e5, we have nullified this bishop. Secondly, this knight has become a little bit more passive as well because of this pawn on e5 and the pawn on f6 also, because now all of the squares over here are covered by these pawns on f6 and e5. So the knight does not really have good forward movement on this side of the board, and it cannot go to h4 either because it's not going anywhere from h4. So this knight also has become very useless alongside this bishop on b2. So this is a very, very powerful idea that I want you to remember. In these types of positions, you can play moves like f6 and e5, and it's much better than a move like queen g5, because queen g5 only serves a defensive purpose. However, a move like f6, yes, the main goal is to stop checkmate, so the main goal was defensive. However, it has other benefits in addition to being a defensive move, and that is that it restricts these two pieces greatly. It takes away squares from these pieces. So that's what I want you to remember. There's one small detail that I want to show you. If instead of knight to f3, let's say knight e4 was played here, you always have this idea of knight to f5, stopping knight d6 right here. And if a move like g4 is played, you have this amazing move knight d6 anyways. Or you can play knight h4 as well. You have multiple moves in this position, but knight d6 just looks really, really cool. And if knight takes, of course, there's queen h1, and if pawn takes, of course, you lose the queen. So I thought that this move was really, really awesome, and that's what I wanted to share with you today. So keep this idea of f6, e5 in mind in these types of positions. And well, if you get these types of positions, but I want you to understand the positional benefit of this structure right here, and how changing this structure to this one right here, where the pawns are on these two squares, reduces the activity of this bishop and the knight in addition to that. Now I'm going to show you a game that I played, and this game is actually in contention for the best game that I have ever played. So this game was absolutely incredible. According to the computer analysis on Lichess, I played this game at a 99% accuracy, so essentially a perfect game. Now I actually did some research with chess.com's game review, and chess.com's game review gave me 96, so it was a little bit lower, and after further analysis, it actually was not a perfect game. However, it still was a very, very nice game with a lot of positional details. And actually, I'm going to show this game to you right now. So my opponent opened up with knight to f3. So we get the ready opening. I went knight f6, pawn to g3, and I chose my setup here. So I wanted to play d5 and c5 because what I want with this setup is that I want to occupy the center. Now, with these two pawns, I have a lot of activity and a lot of control over the center. If I had played a move like g6, yes, I can go for a copycat variation like this. However, the problem is that white gets to the center first, and the thing is, I'm also going to be limited in my activity. So I chose to take the center first, and then I chose to play g6. Now here in this position, my opponent played c4. And now I'm going to show you a really high level positional nuance. So if you don't understand this nuance, you don't have to worry about it. You can come back to this game later on when you're at a higher elo, and then you can try to sort of understand why this is such a good idea. In this position, a move like d4 is positionally not as good for the black pieces because you played this move g6. Now, whenever you play g6, you're basically going to commit your bishop to g7. You don't want to play a move like g6 and then also play e6. You don't want to play both of these moves at the same time. You want to play only one of them. And when you're playing g6, you're committing this bishop to g7, which means that if you push the pawn to d4, this pawn is going to be blocking the bishop on g7, which makes the bishop, of course, worse. So that is why I did not play this move d4. This is actually the top theoretical move, bishop g7. I didn't know this. I was just playing random moves here. I don't really have preparation, at least like good preparation against knight to f3. But now if we were to change the position, and if we were to play a move like knight to c6, for example, instead of g6, now if my opponent had played c4, if we had this position, I would have played d4 immediately, and then I would have followed up with e5, and I would have developed the bishop to this square on either d6 or e7. One of these two squares, they are both good options. In this case, because I haven't committed my bishop to g7, that's why d4 is such a good move here. But with g6, since, oh, sorry, not here. Now with g6 here, because I'm going to commit my bishop to g7, here d4 is not such a good move. But the problem is, if I had played knight c6, my opponent would not have played a move like c4. He would have played d4 instead. Now this is why this is so hard to understand for beginner players. This is like really advanced stuff, like move orders here and stuff like that. But the thing is, if I go into like these types of positions later on, let's say I try to play e5 and try to play these positions, the problem is that white's going to challenge my center very, very quickly, and white's going to get a lot of pressure here. Now white is not winning or anything right away, but white has a lot of pressure. So that's why, that's the downside of knight c6. My opponent is not going to go c4, he's going to go d4 and play that kind of a setup. So I chose g6, and against c4 I chose bishop to g7, pawn takes on d5, I went knight takes, knight to c3, castles. This is not really scary. If knight takes d5, queen d5 is played, there are no good discoveries here. There is legitimately nothing here, so you don't have to worry about this bishop. If the knight ever moves somewhere, you just move the queen elsewhere. You just drop the queen back to e6 or d6 or even d8. You just basically drop the queen back. d6 is probably what looks the most natural to me, and you just continue playing the game. This is not a threat whatsoever. Of course, I realized that in the game. d4 chosen by my opponent, knight to c6. I'm just simply developing, not allowing my opponent to take on c5, because then I would take the knight, and then I would take this pawn right here. So instead of that, my opponent chose to take on d5 here, and then he went knight e5. Now, here, the thing you have to remember is every move that I made in this game so far has been a forward move. I'm not trying to go back. I'm not trying to make my position passive. I'm going forward. So queen takes d4, just simply going forward. Opponent takes on c6. I simply take back, and opponent trades the queens. And actually, in this position, c takes d4 was better than bishop takes. I ended up playing bishop takes. The reason for this is like really advanced, and I'm not gonna get into this right away, but they're both good moves. That's basically what you should remember. I can always go d3 and open up this bishop again at some point if I have to, but bishop takes is what I chose in the game. Now bishop takes c6 chosen by my opponent, and rook to b8. And now I have this position right here. And the thing is, material is in balance. We both have 6 pawns. We both have 2 rooks and 2 bishops. But the thing is, I'm way more active. Because of my pawn structure, this pawn being on c5, I have a semi-open file on the b file. I have the semi-open b file. I have this amazing bishop on d4, which also pressures this pawn on b2. So it's very difficult for white to do something here. And rook to b1 was chosen by the white pieces. And here I played, once again, amazing idea. I played bishop to f5. Now with bishop to f5, of course, I'm attacking this rook. I want this rook to move so I could take this pawn on b2. However, my opponent will play e4, anticipating this attack and of course stopping my bishop in its tracks, and of course the pawn is defended by the bishop on c6. However, this move, e4, changes the position dramatically. Why? Because this pawn cannot go back to e3, so my bishop will stay on this square on d4. It can never be kicked out with e3 anymore. So this is basically an outposted bishop, or a wooden shield, as a lot of people like to call it. This is a very powerful bishop now on d4 that cannot be opposed so easily. So I dropped my bishop back to e6, hitting this pawn. Opponent went b3, and here I calculated a very nice sequence of moves right here. I realized that a move like c4 doesn't really do a whole lot, because yes, I'm attacking this pawn, but in reality this pawn can probably be defended. Well, first of all, white has this move rook to d1. I know, let's say I go back, and the thing is, my opponent just simply develops here. He's going to ignore this pawn momentarily, and he's just going to continue developing, like rook to b6 here. There's even a move like bishop to d7. So there's not a whole lot that's going on here that's really beneficial for the black pieces. So instead of c4, I played rook to b6, and now I played a very nice move, bishop to c4. Now, after bishop to c4, of course, if my opponent takes, I take the rook, but this is not hope chess. That's not the reason why I played bishop to c4. I'm hitting this rook right here, but I'm also threatening bishop to d3. So for example, if rook e1 is played, bishop d3, I win the rook on b1, and I win the game. So this forces rook to d1, and now I go bishop e2. Now, after bishop to e2, I'm hitting this rook, of course. And the thing is, if the rook goes back, I still attack this rook. And if this rook goes over here, I have bishop to f3, winning this pawn right here and still trying to trap this rook. So this rook on b1 is extremely bad. So my opponent realized that he wasn't getting anything particularly good in this position. So instead of playing a move like rook to d1, he chose this move, bishop to h6. So now, instead of defending this rook, he's counter-attacking my rook. So I took his rook, he took my rook, and now I went bishop to d3, winning this tempo right here. So I'm attacking his other rook. He goes rook to d1, I take his pawn, and after bishop e7, I have a very nice move. Only move that wins decisively here, rook to e6. Because after bishop to g5, I attack his rook on d1, and I infiltrate with a move like rook to e2, and now the game is just simply over because this pawn cannot be defended. Well, it can. There's rook to f1, but then of course I would take this pawn and I would win this endgame very easily. My opponent tried bishop to e3. Unfortunately, this loses to rook e3, and after pawn takes, bishop takes, this is when my opponent resigned. So now, why did all of this happen? How was I able to find all of these moves, and how was I able to put all of this together? Well, first and foremost, let me go all the way back, sort of to summarize everything. I chose a setup that was active. I could have chosen a setup that was solid, but remember, solid positions don't give you pressure. Active positions give you pressure, and even though you might not feel the presence and you might not understand why moves like d5, c5 and occupying the center is important, right? Why this is so good right away. As you get higher and higher in terms of your chess skill, you're going to realize these small details. So I went d5 and c5 to take space, and then I went g6, and then after c4 I went into the correct structure. I did not go d4 here. I went bishop to g7 instead, and then from here every move was a developing move. Knight c6 or a queen d5, an improving move. Queen d4, this was kind of forced because there was a threat, but from here every move was either attacking something, developing something, or attacking something again. And attacks again, attack the bishop again, attack this bishop now, take, attack this rook. So every move had a clear purpose behind it. And that's how you should look at these chess games. You should always be thinking about how you can get your pieces active as quickly as possible. Don't play moves like e6 in this position or something like this, because e6 is very passive. There's no threat here with white. White is not threatening anything in this position. You can go with a move like knight to c6, and this is just a very nice developing move. So what I'm trying to say is that you should play as active as possible. And not only that, you should activate your pieces as quickly as possible, and that's how you can find better moves. That's how you can find the best moves in these types of positions. In every position, you need to focus on the activity of your pieces.